Hey, it's News from Heaven. Today we're talking about how we couldn't exist without spirits. So, say thanks to your spirit sponsors. Like and subscribe if you're enjoying a show that talks about stuff like that, like this one. Leave comments. We'd love to have you, sharing what it means to you and how it affects you. And hopefully this episode gives you some more good effect. Or I was going to say affectation, but man, you can't just do that. That's not where that word goes. What the hope is that, so how are you doing this week? You've got stuff maybe going on, right? Me as well. And you've got things coming into the mind that are trying to destroy the state of peaceful, happy, useful existence, right? Whatever they are, you know what yours are. I know what mine are. They rotate, they flip. But whatever this stuff is, it's robbing us of the chance to have the kind of happiness that allows us to produce the kind of happiness in the rest of the world that we can through useful actions. That's bad. The truth should set us free. So if we really think we're onto something here with this whole Swedenborg stuff, then let's see if learning more and getting into the kind of state of mind where we're just hearing about life from this perspective does anything to alleviate the day-to-day head weather. We're going to go into True Christianity, number 118. Download it for free in the link in the description. Follow along. And we're beginning in the middle of a treatise on redemption. And this is going to sound intense. It's a lot of intense stuff in this episode. But I know you came here because you want to feel alive. So this is the title. Without that redemption, no human being could have been saved. And no angels could have continued to exist in their state of integrity. So we've got the stakes already. None of us could have been, if something hadn't happened, this redemption thing, no, we wouldn't be around. And I'll raise you one. No angels could have been around either. So you're talking about, I would say, although the dinosaurs were really cool. I was going to say, this is an extinction event that was threatening, that's more intense and important than the dinosaurs, but the dinosaurs were so awesome. Okay, and what's this? So this redemption plays a part. And what is all of this? And I just don't know if we're going to get our answer in this episode or not about what redemption is, but we just got to hope, and just hope that it's prepared there for us. First, I need to say what redemption is. Bam! To redeem means to free the captive and the bound from damnation. Stakes. I told you this is intense. To rescue them from everlasting death, to snatch them from hell, and to carry them away from the land of the devil. Oh, that's redemption. Okay, so it's not that big a deal. So this is the ultimate rescue mission that God performed for us. How do you do something like that if you're God? The Lord did this by gaining control over the hells and establishing a new heaven. The devil, in Swedenborg's explanation of spiritual reality, is one and the same with the hells, which is one and the same with all the darkness in the human heart. And when you choose that kind of lifestyle, you go to make up the hells. And if you yourself are sitting there thinking, hey, you know what? I would love to start to act on all my worst impulses. I would love to make and cultivate the joy of my life in having power and dominion over other people, in harming them, in doing everything bad. Just FYI, what you go and support is this machine, this monster that threatens to destroy everything, even yourselves. So I'm just saying, it's not a good long-term strategy to do the hell thing. Otherwise, if God hadn't done this, if the Lord hadn't stepped up and done this redemption thing, which this, by the way, is the effect of Jesus Christ. And this is what Swedenborg is saying God did through coming into human form. Otherwise, we could not have been saved. And why? Why, I get you got to gain control over hell, but hell's a long way away. Have you guys ever seen it? I mean, you can't even get there in an airplane or a spaceship. It's like it's another plane of existence. Sure, that thing could get messed up, but we could at least live a happy life here. Otherwise, we could not have been saved, because the spiritual world is so closely connected to the earthly world that they are inseparable. So we tend to think, okay, yeah, you've got something out there that maybe we'll see after death. It's like a next stop. And once in a while, maybe like something comes through, like somebody has some kind of premonition or something. But generally, this is its own self-contained system and things have. What Swedenborg is asserting is that these are the same thing. That this is not two different worlds. This is more like, the blood vessels and the organs and muscles inside your body and the skin of the body. Sure, they're distinct, but they're the same thing. And if one dies, the other is in a lot of trouble. How are they connected, though? The main connection between the two worlds is through our inner levels. Us. That's if you're feeling like, man, I didn't really do much today. How about connecting the two giant layers of reality? Thank you. Our souls and minds. For good people, that connection is with the souls and minds of angels. For evil people, it is with the souls and minds of hellish spirits. So somehow you've got the world, and let's say you've got mean people, people who are acting on the kind of things hellish spirits like, and then those of us who are trying to act on the good things. Both of us serve to connect if we have this outer layer here that's the spiritual world, around this amazing bubble. Both of us are providing the service of keeping these two worlds stitched together, which is essential, as we just saw, for the existence of each. But if you're doing it if you're connecting with love and truth, then you're linking up to these angelic spirits who are in the spiritual world. That's how you're connecting. And if you're linking up with hatred and evil and falsity, you're connecting to that side of the spiritual world. And that's how you're pulling the two in. You're both doing it, but the results are very different. We are so united. And who's doing what for who? Who's doing a favor here? This is what I like about this number. It really sorts that out. And there's twists and turns in here too. Drama, high Swedenborgian drama. We are so united to the angels or the hellish spirits that if they were taken away from us, we would fall down dead as a piece of wood. Now, no offense to wood, but wood is dead. Not just that it doesn't move or anything, but that's what you call a tree after it's dead. You don't go into a forest and say, oh, look at all this wood around here. This is like double dead. So we may think of this frivolous diagram as, okay, well, you've got a connection. Like, oh, I'm connected to some angels, or oh, you've got some bad spiritual influences. And if you could just, but if that connection was severed, you might start to have, your own thoughts, or you might discover sort of what life is like without their influence. No, that is the aorta of your consciousness, that you would instantly disintegrate. Your consciousness would disintegrate without that connection. You might think, wow, if we can be connected to negative spirits and hell is such a problem, wouldn't it just be better to just cut the cord and nobody gets any influences from the spiritual world? We just kind of hash it out here and see how we do. Consciousness is not that simple a thing. It's not something we generate independently. It's like saying, oh, well, the internet is causing problems. Why don't we just smash the Wi-Fi router and then access all of our Google Docs? That's a bad example because Google Docs, I know they can go offline, but you get what I'm talking about. Why don't we just go watch Swedenborgian Life on YouTube without the wireless? You've got to have that connection, even if the traffic is polluted. So, look at us, like us insignificant bottom of the food chain things down here. We have to be connected to people in the spiritual world to even exist. I mean, we just owe them so much. It's just that we must seem like a terrible burden, right? To those people in the spiritual world, because they constantly have to be supporting our ability to be conscious, right? Neither could the angels or the hellish spirits continue to exist if we were taken away from them. Do you ever think that? You ever think that you are life support for angels right now? Hell needs people on earth that believe in hell and live that lifestyle. Heaven needs people on earth that believe in heaven and live that lifestyle. This is the nature of, this is why you could think, oh, things are so bad in the world. Why don't we just Okay, let's have everybody, like, okay, giant asteroid hits the Earth, it all evaporates, we all go up and can get sorted into heaven, and then we'll be happier. Heaven can't exist without a plane in the physical. Hell can't exist, and hell is like a place for people who love evil and false things to try to have the best existence they can. Hell can't exist without a plane in the physical. And you ever think of that? Like, okay, we can't exist without spirits. Sure, spirits can't exist without us. This makes it, but why are we hearing about this in the context of this redemption stuff? The intertwined nature of the world is why God has to do these amazingly tricky maneuvers to get us from destroying ourselves. This makes it clear why redemption was brought about in the spiritual world and why heaven and hell had to be restructured before a church could be established on earth. You may think, well, why doesn't God just, a church, and you may have some baggage around that word, I wouldn't blame you at all, but what Swedenborg describes the church as is a way of being, a way of believing, a way of thinking, of loving that human beings have. And these are often accompanied by religious systems, although back in the day, I think it was more fluid. So why doesn't God just come down and tell people? Because people are all messed up. They don't know how to live. They don't know what's good or bad. There's a lot of people longing for the truth, and we don't have it. But why doesn't God just come down and just start things up and say, okay, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to tell you how to lay out a city plan, and you're going to do this, and you're going to have a great existence, and this is going to spread throughout the world. But that, because we're so tied to the spiritual world, even though our angel and evil spirit disappeared out of that diagram, you can't just educate us, because we're so connected to how the spiritual world thinks that unless you sort out, educate, cordon off, partition the spiritual world in the right ways, anything you do here will just get overwhelmed. It's like if you have ever tried to do some gardening and you have a plot of land that has a lot of bulbs and things and left over from the previous homeowner in there, and you decide, okay, well, I'll just pick these plants and try to plant plants that I think are good. Everything comes back up because the stuff below the soil isn't sorted out. That's what it's like in the spiritual world. That if you just deal with what's here physically, the spiritual world will come through and come through. So we had to get heaven and hell sorted out before we could get, in this case, what Swedenborg is saying is Christianity, at least the good start of it, according to Swedenborg. This sequence is clear in the book of Revelation. After the new heaven was made, the new Jerusalem, which is the new church, came down from that heaven. So you see this famous biblical imagery. That's the idea of something that starts in the spiritual world, then manifesting here. Even though it seems to us like trends start here, they start in heaven and come on down. In case you weren't already convinced that redemption, because of our interdependence with spirits and angels, was important, here's another... I'll raise you one. If the Lord had not brought about redemption, angels could not have continued to exist in a state of integrity either. Really? Even angelic consciousness, perhaps, was at risk? To the Lord, the entire angelic heaven, along with the church on earth, is like a single human being. So that analogy I was giving you before, of like the skin and what's under, that's actually pretty much a correspondence. That everybody who's trying to live by love and truth in the spiritual world, which we call heaven, and everybody who's trying to live in love and truth in the world, which Swedenborg would call the church, regardless of your religious affiliation, if you're trying to live rightly by what you believe, you're in this broader thing called the church. That is like a single person. That is so acting in concert that it's sharing the same set of health conditions. The angelic heaven constitutes the inner level of that person. The church constitutes the outer level. To be more specific, the highest heavens, let's say, what color is highest heavens today? Is it red? Okay, we could go with red. Highest heavens form the head of that person. Hello. The second and lowest heavens form the chest and midsection. So if we have the second heaven is maybe sort of spiritually blue, and then we have a third yellow heaven. So these are the three levels of heaven as described by Swedenborg. Oh yeah, I guess I go like that. The church on earth constitutes the person's body from below the waist to the feet. So if you imagine this is a real person instead of a weird little diagram. You think about how connected your feet are to the rest of you and how it's just one whole there. I mean, this is like us, and this is everything in heaven. You can't take away one. That's how closely we're connected. It's not that they're having a party off somewhere and we're here. This is the level of organism-like connection that we have. The Lord himself, check this out. The Lord himself is the soul and life of the whole person. So within all that, what color is the Lord? Is he purple? Within all that, we've got all the structures, and then the actual animation of this. That's allowing the Lord's life to come in. Just like you need the physical structure for something to be alive here, this is where God's goodness and truth can stream in from even above heaven and have that effect. If the Lord had not brought about redemption, that person would have been destroyed. The loss of the church on earth destroys the body from the waist down. The loss of the lowest heaven destroys the digestive area. So obviously, you lose that, it's over. The loss of the second heaven destroys the thorax. We've got a problem. Then the head loses consciousness because it has no relationship with the body. Interesting to say, like the highest angels, maybe they aren't quite at risk of, being overtaken by evil and falsity. But if you don't have a body, even they living up on their spiritual mountains, they need this. They need this chain of being. Analogies will illustrate this, and we'll just surf through these for fun. It's like someone's feet. Oh, never mind. This is not fun. This is gross. Becoming gangrenous, and the gangrene climbing progressively higher, reaching the genitals and then the abdominal organs, and finally attacking the region of the heart. As we know, at that point, the person succumbs to death. It's graphic, but I guess she's trying to communicate just how serious it is when love and faith is dying in the human race. The implications, the risk that puts all creation at. This can be illustrated by an analogy with disease of the internal organs below the diaphragm. When they fail, the heart begins to palpitate and the lungs begin to heave desperately. In the end, the heart and lungs stop functioning. We say heart and lungs are these like essential things, and they're certainly like star organs, but they need everything else. This can also be illustrated, and this is really fascinating to me, the power dynamic between the higher and lower self. The higher self is everything good and true inside you. It's who you want to be. It's the Lord's connection to us. It's kind of like that soul, which was the purple Lord in the body. This is the good part. The higher self is strong as long as the lower self is obediently fulfilling its obligations. So you might say, okay, we've got the higher self here and the lower self, which is sort of our more ego-ish, like sense of self-y tendencies, and the more sensory level of us. And you might say, okay, this is a total hierarchy because the higher self, the lower self just has to obediently fill its obligations. So the higher self is way more powerful. The lower self is like nothing compared. But if the lower self is resistant rather than obedient, and worse yet, if it attacks the higher self, you think you're so great. The higher self eventually becomes weak and finally gets carried away by the lower self's pleasures until the higher self agrees and goes along with the lower self. So what a fascinating dynamic. It's like, yes, the higher self is destined to lead. The higher self, and not just destined to have dominion, but this is what's best for the lower self in us. Because the higher self can actually lead us to where we can actually get pleasures that are good for the lower self as well. That's how it's meant to be. The lower self is meant to be this thing that serves the greater good, serves the higher self's goals. But the lower self, if it gets out of control, it will win the battle. If we start to buy into and build up and make worse the cravings and all the negative stuff you try not to be, but you get pulled towards being it. If that's what we do, then it can not only overpower the higher self, but in the end, convince the higher self that this is the way to go. Because we're so connected into the pleasure of the negative stuff, we can actually corrupt and lead the higher self away. So, So both, to have it in working order, the higher self needs to be able to call the shots, but the lower self needs to agree to the situation. If the lower self doesn't say, this is what I want and what's best for us, it'll win in the end. Fascinating, man. This can also be illustrated by comparison, with people standing on a mountain who notice the land below is flooded and the water is rising higher and higher. When it reaches the level where they're standing, unless they can ensure their own safety by getting on some life raft washed to them by the floodwaters, they too are submerged. This is like the stuff in the lower self coming up, and we see, This is like when hell is coming up into the spiritual world, and God says, okay, we've got to do something. Likewise, when people on a mountain see a thick fog rising higher and higher above the ground, covering the fields, villages, and cities, finally when the fog reaches them, they don't see a thing, not even in the spot where they themselves are standing. So just because you're up high and you'd be sheltered from things initially, doesn't mean you're going to be immune. It is like this for angels. It isn't interesting that here in this episode on We Couldn't Exist Without Spirits, what we're really focusing on, although it's true, our vulnerability to being cut off from the spiritual world, we're seeing the vulnerability of the spiritual world if it's cut off from us, and that what we do here can really matter to them. And isn't that true? I want to make that point in just a second. Remember I said, isn't that true? When the church on earth dies, the lower heavens also disintegrate. The what? Heavens disintegrate? The reason is that the heavens consist of people from the world. Right? We die, we go there. We are the source of that population. When there's nothing good left in the human heart and no truth from the word, the heavens are flooded with evils that rise up because we lodge them in ourselves and then go there. And they are choked by them as by the waters of the Styx. Nevertheless, the Lord hides good spirits somewhere else and preserves them till the day of the last judgment, then lifts them into a new heaven. The book of Revelation refers to these good spirits in the following statements, and this is about the souls under the altar, which we did a whole show about that you can go check out. I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been killed for the sake of God's word and for the testimony that they had given. They were shouting with a loud voice, saying, "How long, O Lord, who are holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who live on earth?" So that connect to that emotion, like, why aren't you fixing things, God? And part of the message of this episode is like, we are, but it's more complex than you might think. There are more factors at play than you might think. They were given white robes and were told that they should rest a little longer until they were all together. They and their fellow slaves, their brothers and sisters who were going to be killed as they had been. Again, confusing, complex, violent imagery. Check out our episode on that. But remember, I said, isn't that true? Or something. I forget what my trigger phrase was. But what I want to return to is where here it says, it's like this for angels. The water rising up, that even the angels are vulnerable. You might think that's weird, that heaven would have any kind of vulnerability, but isn't that how it is with everything that's good and beautiful? There is an aspect. There's power side by side with vulnerability. You think, well, obviously little kids who are in the most state of heaven are extremely vulnerable, even though they're so powerful in that, when you have a kid, you're like, okay, I'll do anything for this kid. I'll rearrange my whole life to take care of them. And when a kid walks in the room, everybody changes. I remember there's like a picture that my wife had taken when we had our little daughter of like me and like 3 adult male friends of mine, but we're all just like sitting and like looking over at this little baby like, oh, that's so cute. Because little babies have that power, but at the same time, obviously, they're very vulnerable and have to be protected. I'm thinking about nature too. And I love nature. I love the different variety of life and what it means and how it looks and how it functions and just the gorgeous nature of a feeling of being in nature. And it's powerful. You think about things like, there's lions and tigers and bears. Oh my, they're strong. And the whales that are huge and so powerful, and these organisms that can survive these extreme conditions. It's powerful, and all the natural phenomena like weather and things, but then it's vulnerable, and that we as a human race right now are just finding out that something that we thought was inexhaustible and unhurtable. No, I mean it needs us to survive. Isn't that the same thing as heaven, which can give us life, and we have to have, or else we die? Much like this is I'm just realizing that exactly like the earth, we have to have it, and it has to have us acting well, just like the lower and higher self. Wow. Okay. Just like the lower and higher self. Like, you think about nature, and we've got the systems where we can recycle nutrients and we can provide food and that kind of stuff. But if humans are reckless, if we as the lower self just act completely out of turn and don't care about the consequences we're having, we can destroy the whole thing. And likewise with heaven. Heaven can give us the life we need, and it's the greatest power because it has the power, God through it to bring us into heaven. But if we destroy the goodness and truth on earth, even the angels are vulnerable to that destruction. So in the end, you're looking at your day to day. I said before, what's getting you down? Earlier in the episode, I said, hey, just so you know, you're keeping these two worlds intact in addition to your day job, or if you just lost your job and you're feeling like, what am I doing that's useful? One thing you're doing is keeping the two worlds together by your soul and mind, but also everything that we do to try to move towards love is providing this absolutely essential connection. You are providing the platform for heaven, and that every person is like a bit of habitat that heaven can survive in if we love what's good and true and try to act on it to the best of our ability. So we are there, this incredibly important part of this system that not just heaven, not just us, all of us together depend on to survive. That's pretty cool. And that's the news from heaven. So our exploration is not done. We're going to continue in this series of redemption. In the next episode, Hell Almost Destroyed Heaven, where we're going to see farther just how close things got. But in the meantime, I hope you take from this episode something good and true. That is going to, and this is why we do it, because it's not just going to help you feel better during the week, which definitely matters, but it's also going to help keep heaven alive and give heaven the opportunity to make us all happier. So like and subscribe, leave comments. Let's keep thoughts about this going on, but most importantly, take things out into the world and let's create that bridge. All right, see ya.